What's up, everybody? My name is Mary Beth Hill. I'm a person in long term recovery. I've also successfully reintegrated society post incarceration, and I am so excited to be the host of a new podcast called Breaking Quiet. Breaking Quiet was created for women, by women, in all spaces of life, whether they're recovery or reentry, to give a space for our voices. Today, I have somebody who is so special and so near and dear to my heart, Sandra Brown. She is a wonderful woman who has successfully reintegrated society post incarceration. And without telling too much of her story, we'll just get right into it. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm good. I'm running all over the place, but I'm super excited to chat with you because I just adore you. So I can't wait for us to just get into it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. So, if you're wondering why we're doing a virtual podcast and not in person, that is because Sandra lives in Texas, right? Am I right?
Hey,
Texas?
yes.
Yeah. Well, let's not
Yes.
take any more time. Let's just get right into it, Sandra. And I want to know all
Sure.
the things about who you are, where you come from, and what makes Sandra who. So, tell me kind of a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, and what your childhood kind of looked like.
Well, as you said, I'm here in Texas now, but that was an extremely long route to Texas. I was born and raised in Alabama. The name of the town is Clopton, and I always just say near Dothan because nobody knows where Clopton, Alabama is. It is in the southeast corner of Alabama. It's right in that little panhandle area, touches Georgia, Florida, Alabama. So down there in the panhandle. Um, and so I was born and I was raised there. I've lived in I think it was 8 states at last count. So I've lived in Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Texas. Oh, wait, North Carolina, South Carolina. So those are the states that I've actually lived and worked in. And so, yeah, so I ended up in Texas basically for a job, which is how I ended up in most of those states. So I relocated here in 2009. I relocated to Texas for a job.
So, this podcast is actually going to be a little bit different because, unlike the ones of the stories that you've heard prior to Sandra's, we've talked about a lot about addiction and how those choices in our lives have led us to incarceration. But that's not your story, right?
Right. It is
Yeah,
not.
that's not your story. So, kind of tell me what did life look like prior to your incarceration?
Wow. Life looked very calm. I was born and raised, as I said, in Alabama. I was born on a farm. My mom, my dad, two of my sisters. I have four sisters and a brother. I was born a change of life child. For those that don't know, change of life just means your mom was kind of old to have you at the time. So she was literally going through the change when surprise, uh, I was born. She was 45, and so back in those days, that's kind of old. Not now, not anymore, but definitely back then. Um, but my process to getting here in this recovery world, I always tell people it found me. I wasn't looking to um, be involved in the recovery, didn't know what a peer specialist was. I basically was in higher ed, administration professor, four different colleges, and I made choices. I'll say, you can read my book, shameless plug for my book, but I
Yeah,
made
no, go
choices
ahead
that
and plug
needed to be
yourself. Yeah, plug it.
I made choices on Amazon. Choices, Dr. Sandra Smith. But it tells the entire story from the day I was born up until about 2013 or 14. It's actually time for me to finish the story. But in any case, I did not have a substance use story. I don't have an alcohol story. I don't have an addiction story at all. I don't have a mental health challenge story, but I will say it was trauma. And so, as you know, that is what I do now. is I talk to people about trauma. I talk to people about the effects of trauma. I've done a lot of writing and research and information sharing, have written curricula about reentry. And so that is my definition or my defining of recovery is recovering from a place that people have experienced that we don't really talk about the cause of
Absolutely.
incarceration. So yeah,
Yeah, what's crazy is I talk about this, and we've actually been fortunate enough to be in the same spaces in the recovery field now. But that's something that we talk about all the time is, and I love whenever I go, one of my favorite places to go speak are I really love going to the younger generation. I love going to the kids, whenever they're really not experiencing substance use issues, but they're on the verge of it, and they know is that they have life problems, and I always ask them that question, like, what do you think the gateway drug is, and they are always like weed or marijuana, or nowadays they say like vapes. That's always hear vapes. But I'm like, you have no idea that the gateway drug is not even a drug at all, but it is trauma. We use the drugs and the alcohol as a ways to cope with our lives and try to handle the things that we're experiencing because we don't know what to do with it, And so if we look back at every individual in their life, whether they have a substance use problem or they have an alcohol problem or they are reintegrating society back from incarceration, what is the common denominator that we all share? And that's trauma, right? Yeah. So
absolutely.
you found yourself
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, yeah, so you found yourself incarcerated in what year, Sandra?
I was incarcerated in 2002. I actually had just come back. It's not funny, but I laugh at it now. Because I had just come back from a trip to Rome, to Italy. I have a niece that's an architect. She went to Notre Dame and they spend their junior year in Rome, and her mom didn't really want her to go. So the compromise was, okay, we'll come visit. So I went with my sister and two of my other nieces to Rome. We had just returned. I was all excited, and I got a doorbell. Somebody rang my doorbell, and that's where the end began. So it was really they had an extradition warrant, and I didn't know all the things that I know now 23 years ago, obviously, but I basically volunteered. I waived extradition, which I probably wouldn't have done that had I known what I know now. But in any case, I voluntarily went back. So the charges were in New York, and I bought my own ticket and went back with a friend thinking we were coming home together. And that just never happened. So I went from North Carolina to New York voluntarily, went before the judge, and he basically said, hurry up, the bus to Rikers is about to leave. And I was like, Rikers as in island? Um, and sure enough, that's where the bus was going, and that was a bus that I ended on, and that's how this got started.
How long was your sentence, if you don't mind me asking?
It was well, the sentence was 6.5. Wait a minute, 3 to 6.5. So they yeah, it was a 3 to 6.5 year sentence. But I only did 18 months because I qualified for work release. They basically just wanted me out of their system once they got me in my system because I mean in their system. I asked too many questions. I wrote too many letters, and it was like, yeah, get her out of here. So, yeah,
They hate to see people like us coming, right? Like people
a
who come
thousand.
into the judicial system who have a little knowledge of the way things should be ran or the injustices that we're seeing inside behind the walls. And because we have a voice, they hate to see that coming, right? Like I remember
A
being in
lot.
prison and I will never forget, like, you know, I knew how to use my voice by the time I was incarcerated. And so when I got there and I was experiencing so many of the injustice that women experience inside a prison, like if you've never been to prison, you don't know what that looks like. one of the biggest things that we see amongst women in prison, the lack of mental health care, the lack of having the provisions that we need as women, to be inside prison. And so, what does that look
Mhm.
like? Tampons, pads, feminine hygiene products, the things that we need to sustain us through incarceration. And they hated to see me coming because I was so quick to put paperwork in their life that they never
Yep.
wanted to do.
They wanted me out of there. I didn't have a PhD at the time, but I had a master's and I had a brain. There was a unit, I won't say it out loud. It was one of the so I started let me go back. I started at Rikers Island, which is most people think Rikers is a prison because it's so notorious, but Rikers is actually a jail where you go before you get sentenced. I got sentenced. I finally gave up. I was at Rikers for 8 months, just going back and forth, and I finally was over it. I was like, just I did commit the crime I committed. Can we just get on with this? Um, but I literally went to every female unit in the state of New York. Every one of them I spent time in because it was like, hurry up and get her out of here, like literally. I actually got sent to it's kind of like a boot camp type situation, and I went all the way almost to Canada, and which is the farthest prison there is in New York, and it was just like, you have been disqualified due to the nature and sophistication of your crime. And I was just like, say what now? So my crime was embezzlement, and so I, I don't know how that's too sophisticated for a boot camp, but apparently it was. So I ended up shackled and chained. Interestingly, short note, in New York, the box, I'm sure you're familiar with that
Yeah,
black box thing. An
absolutely.
ex-prisoner of New York actually helped design that after they got released, ended up several years later reincarcerated and had to wear the very black box that they designed. But I just thought that was pretty bizarre. So after traveling to every unit in New York, I ended up at what is called KSAT, which is a comprehensive alcohol and substance abuse treatment, was what the acronym stands for. Now, mind you, I have never done drugs in my life. Um, and after being shuffled around, like I said, to pretty much every unit, I went before this counselor and he kept saying, I know you've done drugs. Everybody, I see here that you went to college. Everybody that went to college tried drugs. And I was like, no, they didn't. Serious, like, well, did you try at least marijuana? And I was like, I tried marijuana once in my life and I didn't like the way it felt. Basically, I felt nothing. He was like, fine, you're going to KSAT. So me saying that I tried marijuana once qualified me for a substance use program. And I was not arguing with him. I was like, if it's going to get me out of here, call me, whatever you choose to call me. I'm fine with it. And that's how I went through the program. That was an additional 6 months. I had to wait. I don't know how many months, but eventually I ended up, that prison's name was Tacoma, and I went through the program at Tacoma, which got me work release, which is what got me out of prison.
And so for the listeners that are listening today, and you're probably wondering, like, where does Sandra fit on the realm of the recovery space? But I want you guys to understand that she is a very instrumental part in the peer workforce and in recovery. When we talk about people who come out of incarceration and who are really beginning to make a footprint in the world of reentry and recovery, you are looking at one of the biggest footprints, especially of women in this field that I know. You took that experience from being inside of prison and it completely changed the trajectory of what you did with your life after that. So let's talk a little bit about that. When you got out of prison, what was the shift? What was the change to make you go from working in the corporate America world to doing what you do today?
The shift was the conversations that I had with the individuals while I was there. Um, I went in with um, this idea that, how did this happen to me? Blah, 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 blah. And the answer was because you committed a crime. Um, but then I literally started having individual conversations with people who were incarcerated because they had been convicted of prostitution multiple times and ended up with some drug charges, you know, blah, blah, blah. But it all started because they couldn't feed their kid. Or there was somebody that was in there for murder. But it turns out they had been abused for years and years and years. And what they needed was support in a safe place, and they ended up incarcerated. So the more I heard those stories, it finally occurred to me it wasn't about me, because that
Absolutely.
wasn't my story. It didn't mean they were just people. They were women that were trying to survive and trying to live. And I'm sure you know the data. 80% of the folk that end up incarcerated either have a substance use or a mental health challenge. Those folk don't deserve to be incarcerated. They need to have treatment. They need to be able to get counseling. And if the case is that they need medication, they need to have that available to them, because the assessments that are happening while incarcerated are not adequate to actually address these individuals' challenges. So yeah, it started while I was incarcerated. I got out, um, and some people had made some calls for me. I ended up at Medgar Evers College in New York. I told my story to the president of the college. He listened very intently and said, "Don't tell anybody else that story." And I thought, oh, wow, we'll get you a job. Don't worry about it. They did. I went to work. I worked there for almost 6 years. Um, and I got out. To answer your question, Mary Beth, I got out and I went back to my life. I didn't, I didn't even know there was a recovery world. I didn't know there was peer support. I got out, I got that job. I left there, I think it was 6 years. I went back, I got my PhD while I was there. I ended up moving to Atlanta in 2009. I got offered a job at Strayer University. I was a professor. I got promoted, and that's how I got to Texas. I got interviewed, and they wanted me to come to Texas. I came to Texas. I worked here at Strayer. They laid us off in 2013. There was a mass layoff. They laid off 100 people. I was caught up in that, and literally that morning, I got a phone call saying, "Hey, we're laying off 100 people today, and unfortunately, you're one of that 100. We just needed to call you, let you know ahead of time." I was in California. I wasn't at home, so I knew what I had to do. Like, okay, your computer's gonna go off in about a half an hour. So, you go into, oh, this is what has to happen. Your credit card is going to stop working tomorrow, so you need to make sure you get home. All the things. And in that moment, I felt paralyzed, but literally something, well, in my world, it was God. To those that don't
Yeah.
believe, it was what it was. But for me, God literally said, "Now go write the book." And I was like, "What book?" And I started writing at Rikers as a way to block everything out. But it turns out I was writing about everything that was happening through the whole incarceration experience, and it was on paper. And I was being told it's time to take it off paper and it's time to publish it, because that's what gave me the rest of my freedom. What was like, okay, that college president told you not to tell your story, but you need to tell your story. You need to share it.
Absolutely.
And that's
Yeah,
how
so that
that's who
we hear that a lot, right? Like, I know, like, I come from a household and, granted he was your professor, but, like, with my mom, she was kinda very similar in that aspect when I started to do this thing about, like, recovering out loud and really, like, telling the world about my story and my experience in incarceration, and not just my mom, but a lot of different people were like, "You don't have to tell these things." Like, we come from this generation where we need to keep it in, save face. You don't have to tell everybody your business, just going about your life. But that's what healed me. Whenever I could really begin to just tell my story of who I was and like where I had come from and where I am now and all the challenges and all the hills and the valleys and the in-betweens of my life, I found in those moments, like that is when the healing process for me began, and I could tell my story.
absolutely. And I don't think I know that my family didn't like they didn't intentionally do anything. I think there was this um I think our families, I don't think. I know our families are embarrassed, right? First and foremost.
Yeah,
And for me, I was the baby of the family and the good grades in high school and blah 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 blah. Like, how could you do this to us? Kind of. Do you know what I'm saying? And we get left out of that. Now there's also a space where I think families get left out of the recovery and the reentry process as well. And we're actually working on a curriculum for that. But I think there's just this space of all of the um, just all of the things that come with being formally incarcerated or as people say, a convict, or just all the derogatory things that you get labeled as because of all the stigma that's attached to somebody that has been incarcerated. So you're automatically labeled as a bad person.
yeah,
So that's how society thinks about it. That's how they look at it. They don't look at it as, the only difference in me and you is I got caught and you didn't.
exactly.
They don't look at, they don't, right? Like they're just like, you're labeled a them, a that. You're no better than what that piece of paper says that you are. And I don't know anybody that hasn't gotten a job and the paperwork says I can't hire you, or get the job, get hired, and HR calls and says, "Oh, we have to rescind that offer because your background check came back and you have to be I don't know, 10 years off paper," or some of the most ridiculous things that I heard. And what I say to people now, similar to when you talk to young people, is first of all, companies decide their hiring practices. There is no giant federal law that perhaps prohibits people from hiring you. That company, that board, that whomever decides their hiring practices, and that's what they put into writing. Um, so technically, you really could hire me if you wanted to hire me, but again, you're going by what that piece of paper says about me as opposed to what you already determined was the truth based on my interview, but you have chosen to go by what the piece of paper says. Um,
I think that
and I think
society does that to us, right? I think that society has literally
100%.
instilled this little piece into our brain that tells us that we are not employable, that we are not worthy, that we are always going to be like you said, the convict, the person who's been to prison, the inmate, that we are defined by this past that we have. And I can't tell you how many people I see posts all the time on my Facebook. Do we know any felon friendly hiring places? And I always respond,
You
everywhere.
hate it?
And they're like, everywhere. Exactly. Everywhere. So my friend who I just interviewed right before you, her name is DK. She is literally one of the top sales representatives at an organization called Windows and More, but she leads that organization in sales. My friend Nikki, who has been to prison, she is a realtor, right? Like, we can hold spaces and not allow our past to define us. So if you're listening to the podcast today and you are one of those people who think that I cannot do this because of my felony conviction, why not? Who says? You know what I mean? Like, who says that we can't be these badass women in recovery and reentry who can work in the same spaces? Why are we not deserving?
I would take it even a step further, Mary Beth, and say we probably qualify more than most because if there's one thing that's never going to happen to me again is I'm not doing anything to land myself back in that hell of a place. So I feel like I could probably be trusted to do a job much better than a lot of people that, again, they're going judging people based on a piece of paper, as opposed
Absolutely.
to what I've done in the last 23 years, getting ready to be 24 years since I was out. Um, and the curricula that I've developed and the people that we've gone in and had them understand trauma, to put a name to their stuff, put a name to things that they experienced that nobody knew. At 5 and you're 45 and you finally feel safe enough to have those conversations. So 40 years of trauma literally gets lifted off of you because we're able to create environments where people feel safe to have those conversations. There's like that for me is the ultimate. So, being able to come out, understand, what that feels like and what it looks like from an internal perspective, but also having had those conversations with those women that were just people, that were just trying to live their lives, that were just trying to pay their families. And so often they just got caught up in a system that is not forgiving, that is very
And it's truly
punitive,
broken.
that is not
Yeah.
about it's not about rehabilitation. It's not about any of the things that we thought it was about. So then we do get to be out here and we do get to be badasses because we know what it looks like and what's required to try to help those folk. We can't do it for them. They have to be willing, but we can help them with the resources and we can definitely help them um, with that understanding of trauma, where I've been blessed to be able to write and create and develop again curricula about reentry, but also about trauma, about the before, during, and after effects of trauma that got coined and trademarked and now is in pay-tell tablets in 65 jails in the United States. And I don't say that, I say that because for me, it just reiterates that you have to find your way. Society's not going to be this kind, forgiving place. It ain't going to happen. You have got to kick your own door down and you have to find your own space, but it is doable. And there are people that can support and will help and will listen. And it ain't easy, but most things worth having aren't necessarily easy, but they're definitely accomplishable if you apply yourself.
I wish that you could have been at this conference that I was at here recently. It was called Decarcerate, and we really highlighted and focused on, looking at the judicial system in Arkansas as a whole and what that looks like. Judge Wendell Griffin gave this wonderful presentation, and it's shocking to know. I don't know what Texas looks like, but if you look at the rates of people who are incarcerated in the state of Arkansas per capita, so every 100,000 people in the state of Arkansas, there are 912 people who are incarcerated, and we are number one, leading not just the nation but the world in incarceration rates. I recently
Wow.
saw a tweet from our governor that said that we needed to build, she's really working and she's emphasizing putting in more prisons in the state of Arkansas to help clean up the streets of and to make Arkansas safe. And in my mind, I'm like, what is happening, right? Like, this
I
is
hear it.
not the answer. Mass
Nope.
incarceration is not the answer to fix a problem, because eventually these people will come out of prison
Good to
just like
get out.
myself. We will eventually reintegrate society, and then we have the same problem that we had before they went in. So now we've spent millions of dollars building these facilities to house these individuals, but where is the programming? Where is the mental health? Where are the things that are going to teach these individuals to not come back? Like, that's the thing. Like, I mean, we look at the people in
It's
our
not
community.
designed. Yeah, it's
Huh?
not designed to do that. The
Right.
prison system's not designed for that. And that's the biggest thing I say to people is we hear so many times, that such and such state is implementing programming and it's doing this and the other. And it's like you just literally said, you have a governor that thinks putting building more jails. If you look at the per capita number that you just said and you compare it to education, which really would actually help with some of this, it's abysmal. They pay so much per capita to keep a person incarcerated versus keeping them, well, yeah, employed versus keeping them employed, but also versus educating them. Like there's so many studies, there's so much data out there. And if states would take the time to look at those numbers for what they really are, that, hey, maybe if we took some of this incarceration money and put it into education, that it would actually decrease the number of people that are being incarcerated. But that's not the perception. And that's also not the case. Like there's no part of me that believes there are some good wardens. There's some good people working in the carceral system that really do want to make a dent. So I don't want it said that I don't think that. But what I do think is that there are way more that see this as a job, that see this as the capitalistic society that it is. You look at privatized prisons, you look at the revenue that privatized prisons are making, juxtaposed to what it looks like for the programming that they are providing. And so much data right now that shows InReach is so much more successful than just having people come in, provide programming, and then they leave. And then they are released. And then everything that they understood about support, they get released. Excuse me. People know where people are being released from prison and they know what time they're released from prison. So instead of a peer specialist going to pick them up, their pimp or their abuser or their whatever goes to pick them up, and the cycle literally starts over again.
Absolutely.
What would it look
Yeah.
like to provide peer support inside 6 months to release, even 3 months? I would feel better about than not at all. But 3 months to release, and that same peer specialist actually picks you up. That same peer specialist who's made a recovery plan for you, and they know the address that you're going to, or they've arranged for you to go, even if it's to reentry housing or whatever it looks like. But just knowing that that person that has been through what I've been through is going to be there to pick me up. And that's called continuity of care. That's called
Absolutely.
figuring out a way to give people an opportunity to really reintegrate and to start the recovery process, regardless of if it's mental health or substance use, or I just got caught up in this hellified system and it's worth recovering from in and of itself. And to that point, SAMHSA created, before everything went to hell in the handbasket, SAMHSA understood and felt that incarceration needed to be added as its own unit. So SAMHSA actually recognized, SAMHSA, for your view, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is the federal government's now AHA's. I think SAMHSA's gonna have an opportunity to remain SAMHSA, but the point is it's the entity of the federal government that oversees mental health and substance use for the United States, and it actually created a reentry division because they understood, and the data again speaks for itself, that this is a huge part of our country, that we have an opportunity to help them start the healing process and recovery as well.
Yeah. Sandra, so what organization do you currently work for right now?
I currently work for One World Recovery Network, which is a 501c3 recovery organization. And OWN actually has the CARS, the Center for Addiction Recovery Support, which is a SAMHSA grant. And my desk is glass, but if it were wood, I would knock on it. It's one of the two or larger SAMHSA grants that have survived this political climate to provide technical assistance to organizations throughout the country. Um, and that technical assistance is around substance abuse and mental health and reentry. It's creating peer organizations. It's supporting implementation work. It's what does it look like for a startup RCO, recovery community organization? What does it look like? I want to do it. I want to start it. I want to start it right. I don't know how to do a budget. I just know I want to do this work and I want to support people. So there are consultants that can help in pretty much any area of recovery throughout the country. So it's an amazing opportunity as well for people to get free support because the center is funded to support those initiatives.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, for you listeners who don't know, I do work for a national organization as well called the Archway Institute and the National Peer Recovery Alliance. And it's such an amazing space where we are able to meet and collaborate with people who are like minded, who are really trying to look at making the landscape for recovery, substance use, mental health, and reentry different. You know, I can't help but think, we are making a change. The things and the stuff that we are doing each and every day is making a change, whether we see it or not. I will say this about Arkansas. We are very fortunate enough, whenever our friend Jimmy McGill, whenever he was the director of peer services here in Arkansas, whenever he started to implement the programs into the facilities. So we have a taste of that here in Arkansas where we do happen to see, at the lower level, in the county jails, a little more compassion from numerous different sheriffs and organizations that allow for these peer-led programs to be held inside their facilities. People don't realize the power of peer support, and I don't just say peer support as a profession, which is super vital, but the power of lived experience, right? Of one person who has lived through these traumatic experiences being able to walk next to a person and say, "Hey, I've been there too. Let me show you that there's a different way." You know, I, my hope and my dream, is one day to see a peer support specialist working at all levels, whether it is the traffic court, whether it is the district court, as soon as they're going in for these first time charges, to have that person with lived experience saying, "Hey, let me show you how to do something different," so that we're not continuously caught in this perpetuating cycle of in and out, back and forth. You know how it is. I mean, I can say we were both very fortunate that once we went to prison and we committed those crimes, I never went back. You know what I mean? That was enough. That was all that I needed in my life. And I was like, "Oh, I had a taste of this. I'm done."
Good.
We're fortunate
Yeah.
because that is not the story for so many people.
Yes.
So many people have to
Most.
keep going back and getting a little taste, a little more of that. We talked about that earlier about accountability. They have to be willing to take that accountability to say that, like, I want to do something different, but most of the time they just don't know the way. And then we look at our judicial systems and we look at the probation offices and the parole offices, and they are bogged down with so many, their caseload is miles long and they are one person. um, you know, so the peer support factor, I will rep it until the day that I die. I will advocate it for peer support until the day
1,000%.
that I die because I have watched it and I have seen so many miracles happen whenever we allow people with criminal, and let's be realistic. So this is another challenge that we face. I was actually talking to a DEA agent not too long ago, and we were talking about how I wish peer support could be in the federal system, but we will never see that because they are so resistant to having anybody who has a criminal background, to be in any part of that facility or any part of those changes. So I continue to foster those connections, like, "Hey, I can't work for you, right? Like, but I'm here to help you." So if you need me, and that was one of the things he asked me, Sandra, and it made me feel good. He was like, "Can I call you if we need to help put people into treatment?" Absolutely. Yes, you have my
Absolutely.
number. You call me anytime, and I will be more than welcoming to help you navigate that system because they just don't know. They don't know. What they don't know, they don't know.
And that's interesting because DOJ was one of the first to acknowledge and supposedly understand and support peer support, a peer curriculum. I can't remember. Excuse me. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but I was shocked because what you say is true. It's like, wait, how are you supporting? How's Department of Justice supporting creating curricula that can never be taught inside by people that could be the only people that could teach it? Because peer support means, and I have lived experience. Didn't make any sense to me, but there's a lot of things that happen with a lot of these systems that don't make any sense. But I'm the same. I'm just like, I drank the peer support Kool-Aid, and in 2021 we had the opportunity to write a HRSA grant at the organization that I used to work for, which was Via Hope, the Mental Health Resource of Texas. Which, by the way, I always one of my claims true to Jimmy McGill, which I think we were together when he told you the whole story about how I came to Arkansas, me and two other of my team members, and we provided the first peer support training to Jimmy before he like I told him
Yeah.
before he was like famous, that we did the first peer training, but he came to Texas. We do have um, some amazing programming and have gotten kind of far with the whole peer support movement. But the grant that I was talking about in 2021 was a HRSA grant. And we basically wrote the grant for non-traditional settings for peer specialists. And it got funded in September of 2021. And for the 4 years of the grant, we basically, it was a pilot, obviously, but it was to embed, that word is interesting, but to embed peer specialists in settings that they'd never been in. So we had peer specialists in Travis County Jail. We had peer specialists in mental health public defender's office. We had peer specialists in libraries. We had peer specialists in private defenders' offices. There's a list of 9, but again, non-traditional settings, to which, just again, for data purposes, we were in the 3rd year able to go before the Travis County Commissioners Court, who are the people who decide the budgets of Travis County, and presented the data from the Mental Health Public Defender's Office and some SAMHSA data about evidence-based um, practices, and we actually got line items for peer specialists in those areas for the first time ever. So it works. Like, there is just
Yes.
no ifs, ands, and buts about it. But we were so excited and so proud to be able to accomplish that. And they're still there. They're still funded. But just wanting to do more of that work. But that's how you know you're able to make an impact, because if they hadn't been willing to listen to us, they never even heard a peer specialist. But now, at the Mental Health Public Defender's Office, which is unique in and of itself, most counties don't have a specific court for mental health. It's all
Yeah.
kind of in the public defender's office. But Austin is unique in some of its approaches. But they ask for the peer specialist now, first and foremost. Is a peer specialist here? Because they now know there's somebody here in this space that has gone through a mental health challenge that can help talk me through. Um, most of the folk in that area are SMI, severe mental illness. Hate that word too, but they have suffered or are suffering from severe mental illness, and so sometimes they're just on medication where they're not even cognizant of what their sentence is, or they don't understand the terms, like they just don't know. But having somebody that's been through that process has proven essential for them. So we do our little piece, right? Like you said before, we do the baby steps and the little pieces, but when we can actually see change uh in real time, it helps. For me, it's sobering to be able to say, okay, we're doing the right thing. We just got to keep little by little, chomping away,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and 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 that's how we make the progress.
Well, Sandra, I want to thank you so much for your time, for coming on and chatting about all the things. Once again, Sandra Smith, she's wrote her book. What was your book one more time?
Choices. It's Choices by Dr. Sandra Smith. It's on Amazon. It's also in Barnes& and
Yeah.
Noble. Or you
I
could go to
always
my
ask.
website.
Yeah. So I always ask everybody that comes on the podcast, if you could leave, the listeners with one message, whether it's somebody that is coming out of incarceration or, maybe facing incarceration, whatever their story might be, if they're struggling with substance use, whatever the case, and really, I'm going to be honest with you, my hope for this podcast is not just to have those listeners, but I would really love, for people in all areas of the space to be listening. If you could leave them with one message, what would that message be?
That there's hope. There's hope, as long as you are given the gift every day of life, which I see life as a gift every day. That means that there's a purpose and that there's hope and that there are people out here that want, that thrive in the space of trying to help people find, um, hold on to that hope, because in the hope there's healing. And so, regardless of what you've been through, regardless of what has happened to you, it happened to you. It's not who you are. And there's always hope, and there's a healing process.
Thank you so much. We want to thank you guys to all our listeners who've tuned in for this episode of Breaking Quiet. You can find us on all major streaming platforms. Subscribe to the long term of Podcast and Recovery on YouTube, and we hope to see you guys the next episode.